the beginning of the title fight. That's what I would call the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix. Although there was not much going on really in quite a few parts of the races. I feel like we did get some spiciness towards the end. How did you feel about the Canadian Grand Prix, Tunda? You had some high expectations.
Yeah, I said there would be a red flag, shuffling things up. I did not, sometimes I predict a collision between teammates or stuff like that. I did not predict that this time, but we saw it. And you say the start of the title fight, or is it the end of the title fight?
That's the question we will know in Abu Dhabi.
That's true. And we will see in Austria how this continues as well. Because as we saw, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri finally, for the first time this season, basically went wheel to wheel, and it did not end well. Lando Norris, just in the week before the race, he was saying it's inevitable. We will come together at some point, so we just have to. That's a fact we have to face. I guess nobody expected it to be as soon as it did, as it was. But I mean, the fight was actually pretty exciting. Like before the final incident, the way they move on Piastri and then them going side by side on the straight, pretty cool. Yeah. And then Lando just decided to drive into a wall.
Well, how the turntables, because 2011, we just spoke about that race. Basically after the Spanish Grand Prix, we said 2011 collision, between two McLaren teammates, then Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton, but even at the same place, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Same
wall of the McLarens.
The wall of the McLarens. There you go. The new name, Wall of the Champions, then is the Wall of the McLarens. But it was a role reversal. So basically, the other car was at fault.
Yeah.
Meaning completely Norris was at fault because, maybe he took Ayrton Senna's words a little too close to his heart, no longer go for a gap that exists. I mean, it was a bit optimistic from Norris to think he can put his car in there. Maybe he thought that Oscar Piastri, the new Iceman, is gonna, budge. He's gonna move. He's gonna fear a little bit, but he just completely held his own, even when it was not his weekend. But yeah, it seemed like the McLarens kind of lost their ultimate pace, at least on this weekend, because the Red Bulls and the Mercedes, or at least the Red Bull of Max Verstappen and the Mercedes was ahead on pure pace, I'd say.
And, that's hopefully a sign of some more exciting races to come. And, it's really a shame with the McLaren collision because, Lando was having a pretty good race before that. He was arguably faster on track than Oscar that day. And, props to him for immediately owning up to the mistake and not blaming it on his teammates, saying, "Oh yeah, guys, I fucked up. It's my fault." Which, on one hand, I think it's commendable. Obviously, owning up is always good. But on the other hand, I feel like you could really hear from it the kind of the way it hit his. I think it kind of hit Lando's self-esteem again. Because we've talked about whether what Lando Norris. What he needs is a therapist right now. About his mentality, his mindset, the way he is kind of harsh on himself, right? Because he always says, "Well, if I'm not winning, and it's my fault," and da 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 da. And I don't think a crash like this helped that one. It's kind of a self-flagellation of whipping himself on the back, and I don't think that's the way to kind of learn from this. If you're gonna say, "Oh, I'm such a fuck up," basically.
I agree. I mean, we said it many times. We thought that we solved what Lando Norris needs, right? We said that he needs a mentor, like Valtteri Bottas had Mika Häkkinen, and surprisingly, perhaps a Monaco-based YouTuber called Nico Rosberg was listening to our amazing podcast. He took he took our words for granted and he tried to take the fate into his own hands. And he apparently messaged Lando Norris about, trying to maybe work with him and help him, gain a little bit of an edge on the mental side, in Formula One. But apparently Nico Rosberg was just left on red and never replied, which, kind of sad and maybe a missed opportunity as well. We thought we solved it, but seems like Lando Norris wants to take his fate in his own hands. But he is now trailing Oscar Piastri by quite a few points. It's over 20 points, I believe. So, again, we're talking about it the same as last year. Norris potentially fighting an uphill battle, which he completely didn't need to. So, it's a good day on a bad day for Oscar Piastri, because he also could have lost quite a few points because, as you said, Lando was quite a bit quicker. But looking at the top, George Russell winning the Grand Prix, it didn't look for a second in doubt. I don't know how it looked to you, but he was fully in control.
And, I think it's just really funny that every single time that George Russell wins, it's never the main topic of discussion of the race. Because some other ridiculous bullshit happened. Such as with, the first win in Brazil, you had Max not wanting to let Perez through.
And Hamilton crashing with Verstappen.
Then, was it Austria, the next win?
Yeah.
In Austria, you had, the famous crash or collision between Max and Lando last year. Then, anything else?
I think it was Las Vegas as well.
Vegas, yeah. I don't know if there was any big, but then again, this time, the McLaren's colliding. Nobody really cares about old George, but people do, care about Kimi Antonelli and his first ever podium.
Oh my
F1 race.
The fan favorite.
And right before he graduated high school as well. Imagine that your first F1 podium and your final exams in the same week. Probably.
That's just pain, not being able to celebrate. But on the other hand, imagine what Antonelli is going to be capable of once his focus is just 100% on F1, because, I don't know, like for me, I'm really thinking that he's been putting up really good performances, especially Canada, Miami. But, since you mentioned the tests and the final exams, I still think that, you have to dedicate some of your mental capacity, some time. So I'm curious as to how Antonelli can move forward when he's going to be fully focused on racing.
No, of course. And I mean, what a performance from him as well, though, the move on Oscar Piastri in the first lap, during the first lap, which put him into P3. He was talking about it then in the post-race interview. He was also, he saw a gap, so he went for it. That's it's really
little Ayrton.
But it's. I feel like what Anthony, whatever he talks about, he talks about it very matter of factly, very very. Oh yeah, well I'm racing, so I was. Well, so I saw a gap, so I tried, And
it's fairly straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah, very straightforward. But really great performance, and we had a double podium for Mercedes, 1-3. Which put them back into P2 in the Constructors' Championship after a not so great weekend from Ferrari.
God.
Charles Leclerc looked like he was on pace for pole position even, but then getting hit by some dirty air from Isaac Hadjar.
Have you seen the videos?
Yeah. And then, which was mocked, then Hadjar was making fun of Leclerc. I'm stuck in the dirty air. But not as not Hadjar's fault, obviously, but shame because the sectors were purple, and I think if he put it into P1, then probably would have been able to walk away with the win because pace was not bad. Strategy, again, was a bit questionable from Ferrari. I mean, they
As it
pitted
is the
quite early,
tradition.
but I understand that they were covering off Norris, right? I think. And then, yeah, they had no other choice but to kind of try and see if a safety car would come their way or a red flag, which it didn't, even though Alex Albon had I think it was an engine failure or something else.
Another Mercedes problem.
Yeah.
Mercedes power unit problem.
But he managed to get the car out of the way, so no safety car and no red flag. So Leclerc just finished in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, with the qualifying position, he was starting, I think, P8.
Yeah.
After having the first purple sector looking quite promising, then kind of messing it up. I mean, I'd say the lap was definitely, if it was not a pole lap, it was definitely a top 3 lap. I don't know if he would genuinely stay in the position where he would start, if he would be starting first, second, third, if he would be managing to stay there because of the strategy, maybe the pace, because it looked like they had the pace on the mediums, but not so much on the hards. So the hards, the Red Bull was much better. McLaren's kind of came alive, and the Mercedes just seemed pretty solid, overall. But then we have Lewis Hamilton, who qualified decently well.
Yeah.
Even made progress on the start, being pretty close to the top pack. But then the luck struck again. He apparently hit a hedgehog, or he hit some animal.
Something like that, a badger or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Had damage from that.
Yeah, he had floor damage, I believe, right?
Yep.
So I think his front right part of the floor was completely torn apart. I don't know. Some sources said it was costing him almost 0.5 a lap. But I mean, at this point, I've heard, how many times we've had a race where we were saying that Hamilton had some kind of issue. Seems like this guy cannot get a break,
It's the Ferrari treatment. It's the Ferrari treatment. Well, but Ferrari are supposed to be bringing an upgrade to...
We've said that a few times as well.
Well, yeah. Apparently there's a big one, a big floor upgrade coming before Silverstone, which...
Some hedgehog protection.
Well, which, by way of elimination, we can assume that it is in Austria that they're bringing this upgrade. And apparently, this should be the one. Vasseur has said that, this is
our year.
This is a big one.
That's our race.
But, thinking back last year when they brought the upgrades to Spain and then it ruined their performance for, quarter of the season. I don't know how optimistic I am. It's Ferrari, we say it every race, but every episode, but they're having such a weird season. Just kind of
kind of nowhere.
Every time, kind of nowhere. They kind of made it into P2 in the constructors last time. Now they got
somehow
overtaken again. And then with the new Mercedes pace, unless the upgrades work, then they're probably not gonna be able to keep up. But it would be nice to have a 4-way battle once again, like we saw in the latter half of the last season. That was quite nice. But now we have, but Max Verstappen is still not out of the picture in terms of the Drivers' Championship.
You can never count him out of anything because he's consistently on the podium. Consistent pace. The Red Bull was pretty quick this weekend, If it not had been for the George Russell's stellar lap on the medium tires, by the way, Verstappen would have taken pole. And I thought to the last second that Verstappen has comfortably got the pole. And probably, if he started from the first place, I think he would have won. So... And we know that Austria, the Red Bull Ring, is very much a Red Bull track. They've had an amazing track record, except for last year where the two guys of Lando Norris and Verstappen crashed. But we know how good Verstappen is there and how good Red Bull is. So we cannot count Red Bull out just yet as well. And especially after, Norris had no points, Verstappen made points on both of the McLaren boys in the championship. So, yeah, it was an interesting race, but probably a boring race for Max Verstappen.
But you know what was really funny? Because they were starting P1 and P2, George Russell and Max Verstappen. And after last week, after the race before, when Max was rammed into him for no reason, like a madman, everybody was like, oh my God, this is gonna be crazy. Turn 1, lap 1, they're gonna just come together, they're gonna crash each other out. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. And not only did nothing happen, after the race, they were all chummy, kind of dapping each other up outside of the cars. And then on the podium, they looked like they could be better friends.
Yeah.
So
even accounting for the safety car incident, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where George Russell basically tried to eliminate Max Verstappen for the Austrian Grand Prix, but
that was quite funny. That was quite funny. Yeah, I forgot. Even so, and then 5 minutes later, they're pouring. Max is pouring champagne down his neck.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
But the document. Have you seen the document outlining how the meeting went between Red Bull?
No,
and Mercedes?
I haven't.
Because George Russell kind of brake tested Max, basically. Brake checked Max. And then, Max kind of went a little ahead. And then George went, he's overtaking me. He's overtaking under the safety car. And then Max was like, oh, he's being erratic. He's just braking randomly. And after the race, Red Bull tried to raise that with the stewards. I guess also worried that Mercedes would. And then there was just a whole section of driver of car 63 argued. And then it's like reading an encyclopedia because George has the whole rule book memorized. And he says, he was the Yapatron 3000. I saw people call him on Twitter. But yeah, I don't think you want to argue with George Russell because he knows his shit.
Yeah, George Russell knows his stuff. I mean, that's don't argue against him if he knows the whole rulebook, right? But overall, the race. Let's talk about the tire compounds, right? Because we had, again, this I think it was the C6 compound, right? The softest allocation possible. I feel like I have two split views on this. And one view is that it is brilliant for the race because, after a long time, we've got pretty much guaranteed two stoppers, for most of these kinds of races, which, at least in this case, could be a little interesting because you had, for example, it kind of robbed us also of overtaking because Antonelli was about to overtake Verstappen and he just went to the pits. But you had some pretty interesting moments with the strategy. But in the qualifying, it just feels so kind of confusing because for one team, at one time, the medium is faster. For the other team, the soft is faster. And you just kind of get lost.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. It's a split view. I mean, it kind of just gives a little bit of a surprise element into the quali because we've had Fernando Alonso being pretty rapid on the medium compound tire until towards the end. But yeah, so far I'm a little split on that because it's definitely not really a race tire. So it just kind of makes this harder the softer compounds being used more. So I don't know. Kind of a split view. Better for the race, confusing in the quali. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's been quite the tire selection has been quite weird this season so far. I feel like it is strange seeing people in Q3 on mediums.
Exactly.
But I mean it's bringing something new, I guess. But yeah, I mean I think it also depends, racetrack. I mean Monaco, and having them be softer and so mandating pit stops made it a bit more interesting. Well, we also think back to George now and his view on that. But in general, also split.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is, but I think it's good that Formula One is at least trying to maybe make things a little more interesting. But as I've heard an interview with Adrian Newey, the only thing that could kind of fix the Formula One in terms of making it more attractive for people to watch would be making the cars much smaller and more raceable and more maneuverable with less dirty air and with V10s. So probably we need to have a petition out for all of these regulations, but we might never be able to see these kinds of regulation again. We'll see. But let's get back to our predictions.
Yeah.
What did you predict, Tonda?
I predicted that we would see a red flag, which would shake up the order and bring something interesting to the mix. We did see a red flag during the quali.
And practice where Charles Leclerc crashed out.
Oh, don't...
Missed FP1 and FP2.
That was a horrible one. But I would give myself half a point for this. It might have not been the race, but we did see
I would give you the point.
Well, you're too kind.
Because quali is if it was in practice, wouldn't count for much. But since it was in quali, I think it was due to Alex Albon's car, it would count because it's in a competitive session. And it did mix up things a little bit at least. So, yeah, I'd give you the point. But I must say I have absolutely nailed my prediction, because I said that at least one Mercedes car will be on the front row for the Canadian Grand Prix, and George Russell did not disappoint.
George Russell heard your prediction and made it happen.
Yeah, good job, George. I said it. I thought that George Russell would be the guy to do it because he usually is the one who is called Mr. Saturday.
Yeah.
And that is for a reason, so well done, George Russell, and well done to us, kind of regaining our mojo.
Yeah.
And with that, we're going to have to predict what's going to happen at the Austrian Grand Prix.
I'm going to go ahead and make a very bold prediction, make us lose our mojo a bit. And that is that Max Verstappen will be involved in an incident.
I had a feeling for some reason that it's going to involve Verstappen's penalty points.
Incident, whatever you want to call it. That's not necessarily that he will cause one, not necessarily that he will, get a penalty point and get a race ban. But something, it's one of his favorite tracks. He will want to win if possible. And we saw last year that when that happened, it can get rowdy. And I think if there is the pace for that, and if he has someone that he can fight with, it won't be clean all the way.
Fair enough. And, I would double down if I could. But my prediction is that neither Mercedes will finish on the podium.
Interesting.
Because
Ferrari upgrades working. I like that.
Ferrari upgrades working, and warm conditions in Austria could also cause Mercedes to fall back again.
Quite a hot
the hype.
I saw.
Yeah. So I think that the Mercedes had they were always good in Canada, so they might have had a pretty solid weekend, but I don't think that's going to completely translate into all tracks, including Austria. So that is that. Who would be your driver of the weekend, Tonda? Top field and bottom field.
Top. I think I have to say Kimi Antonelli. I think, of course, George had it, under control the whole time. An amazing lap, but I feel like, we've come to expect, that George is quite a consistent driver, but in terms of, just how impressive Kimi was, I would say him.
That's a good choice.
Bottom field. He's been mentioned here, but he's pushing that car to its limits. I would say Nico Hülkenberg, finishing in the points once again and doing all he can to work with that Kick Sauber.
Yeah, exactly. We haven't mentioned Nico Hülkenberg in this podcast, in this episode, but he has managed to be in P8 with that Kick Sauber. So the upgrades for Kick Sauber working as well, not being the worst car, absolutely. And also shows the quality of Nico Hülkenberg driving absolute tractors to the points. And an honorable mention of Esteban Ocon, who also finished in the top 10. I don't know
But
how he
they've-
manages to
I think
smuggle
that-
that.
But
Haas
I think
there.
last race we saw the same thing. The two of them in the points. Oh, they're
Yeah, exactly.
side by side.
The maestros of the points. Somehow smuggling these backmarker cars into the points. But I think for me, the driver of the weekend from the top teams, it has to be George Russell.
Yeah.
Didn't put the foot wrong, controlled the race, start to finish, didn't let Verstappen come near. And yeah, I think he had an amazing weekend, A George Russell masterclass. It was this weekend, and a redemption after what could have been in the last year's Canadian Grand Prix.
Yeah.
And bottom field driver, I would double down on you, saying it was Nico Hülkenberg, because again, he just somehow does it. And you can't fault him for that. So now, your biggest winner or biggest loser?
I would say biggest winner, just Mercedes.
Yeah.
Because they have the triple header, that was horrible for them.
Mm.
They got DNFs left and right, and everything else. But now they seem like they found something. They understand the car. Though it might have been a single occasion, they get some good points, double podium. And biggest loser, I would say, is Lando Norris's confidence. Specifically, I think if he was struggling before, then now he's gonna really have fight against his own brain, which is never easy,
I agree. For the biggest winner, from my side, I would have said Mercedes. They have had a double podium, first podium for Kimi Antonelli in his career, and the first win of the 2025 season for Mercedes and George Russell. So I think that's a brilliant sign for them, capable of being, of being winners and probably solving some issues with their car. But the biggest losers for me in this case is probably Williams. Even though Carlos Sainz was P10, they have had high hopes of Canada. They have been pretty vocal about it as well. They always have pretty high hopes for Canada. They did last year pretty well. Canada is a track where they usually are doing pretty well. And in this case, it was pretty much a disaster, even from the strategy where you basically heard Albon screaming at his team that either they box him now or they just don't box him at all.
Yep.
Which kind of bit them back. But Williams did disappoint a little bit this weekend.
I agree.
Well, we'll have to see if they bounce back in Austria, because they do need to regain some confidence, some points.
James Vowles need to look at the Excel sheet a couple of more
Exactly.
times. But what would you rate this race weekend out of 10?
It's a genuinely hard Grand Prix to rate, but I would say a 6. Because there was some overtaking. There were some strategy calls that made it more interesting. But then you had also, you had the crash, the McLarens.
Depends on what we're ranking, right? If we want it to be really evil, say Lando Norris crashing 10 out of 10. Man.
Not a Lando Norris hater, but at least it's some drama for the championship, and at least Lando Norris is okay. But what would you rate the Grand Prix?
I agree. I was thinking 5, 6, but I know that the rankings have been controversial these past few episodes, so I will refrain from something too. I can agree with you on 6. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, we'll be excited to get back here to the Final Straight F1 podcast after the Austrian Grand Prix. So thank you for watching, and see you after the Austrian Grand Prix. Bye.
And if Ferrari aren't on the podium, then maybe you won't see one of us anymore.
Yeah. And then 2026 is our year.
And see you.